My girlfriend admitted she cheated. I needed a real man. She smirked. My friends took her side. I just smiled, took my keys, and left. This morning, my phone blew up with 32 missed calls. Looking back, I realize I should have seen it coming. The warning signs were scattered like little breadcrumbs over the past few months of our relationship. But when you're with someone for 3 years, you naturally give them the benefit of the doubt. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. It began with the little things. Allison started working late more frequently, which wasn't unusual during busy periods. But then came the unrecognizable perfume, clothes I'd never seen before showing up in our closet, and her phone suddenly transforming into a sacred object, always within arm's reach. I'm not one to be jealous, never have been, but something just felt off. The way she'd pull away when I tried to sneak up and hug her from behind while she was texting, how she'd excuse herself to take work calls, and the endless girls' nights with people whose names were completely foreign to me. Just last Tuesday, while I was folding laundry, her phone lit up on the coffee table. A message preview from someone named Jay appeared. "Miss you already last night." The rest was cut off, but my stomach sank. I never wanted to be that guy peering into his girlfriend's phone, yet the universe seemed to be yelling at me to wake up. That night, when she got home, I decided to confront her. She was in the kitchen, casually making herself a smoothie as if nothing was amiss. The hum of the blender filled our apartment as I leaned against the doorframe and asked, "Who's Jay?" When she finally turned it off, her posture tensed immediately, but then she did something I wasn't expecting. She smiled, not her warm, familiar smile, but one that was cold and almost triumphant, as if she'd been waiting for me to finally catch on. "Michael," she said, taking a sip from her glass. "Jay's my boss, and yes, I've been sleeping with him for the past 2 months. She delivered it in the most casual tone, as if it were an everyday remark. "I needed a real man," she added with a smirk. "Someone who knows what he wants and goes for it, not someone who spends his weekends playing video games with Jacob and watching dumb movies." I stood there, absorbing her words, 3 years together, and this was how she truly saw me. As the shock began to fade, a strange clarity replaced it. "Does Chloe know?" I asked, thinking of our mutual friend who had introduced us. "Oh, she's been in the loop for weeks." Allison laughed. Most of our friends were aware that Jay wasn't just a fling. He could actually offer a future, not just empty dreams and excuses. That hit harder than her confession ever could. It was as if everyone with whom I'd shared birthdays, holidays, and countless dinners had been silently watching, maybe even laughing behind my back. I pulled out my phone and opened our group chat with Jacob and Chloe typing. "Is this true? You all knew?" Jacob responded quickly. "Bro, you're amazing, but Allison deserves someone more established. Don't take it personally." Chloe chimed in. "We didn't want to hurt you, but maybe this is the wake-up call you needed." I looked up from my phone and saw Allison watching me, that same smug smile still on her lips. She seemed to be waiting for an explosive reaction, a dramatic scene she could later boast about. Instead of exploding, I simply smiled, a genuine smile that caught her completely off guard. Without another word, I walked to our bedroom, grabbed my go bag, always packed for those unexpected weekend trips, and took my laptop and keys. As I passed back through the kitchen, Allison's smile faltered slightly. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "Out," I replied simply. "And Allison, keep the apartment. I'm sure Jay can help with the rent." I heard her start to protest as I closed the door behind me, but I didn't look back. My phone was already buzzing with messages, probably from our so-called friends trying to explain themselves. As I drove away, I turned my phone off and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Sometimes, losing everything shows you exactly what you never truly had. I didn't know where I was headed, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Update. First off, thanks for all the support on my last post. I never expected it to blow up like that. A lot has happened over the past week, and honestly, I'm still processing everything. I've been staying at a small motel on the outskirts of town. It isn't the most glamorous place, but it's clean, and the owner, an older guy named Pete, seems decent. He even knocked $20 off the weekly rate when he heard my story. After 2 days of silence, I finally turned my phone back on. 32 missed calls, 47 texts, most from Allison, some from Jacob and Chloe, and a few from numbers I didn't recognize. But what really caught my eye was the storm of notifications from social media. Allison had been extremely busy. Her Instagram story painted a picture I instantly recognized. Apparently, I was the controlling, jealous boyfriend who monitored her every move, emotionally manipulating and isolating her for years. Allison's social media posts started coming in thick and fast. She was throwing a full-blown tantrum and finally standing up for herself. Every post garnered hundreds of sympathetic comments, even from people I once considered friends. The crown jewel was this tearful video where she alleged I had financially exploited her by forcing her to split every bill down the middle, while I clutched onto my money, even though she made a point of earning more and choosing that very arrangement. Then I got a text from Gemma, a coworker I'd known for years. "Hey, you might want to check your email. Something's going around the office about you." Sure enough, a company-wide email had been sent about creating a safe workplace environment, with a not-so-subtle nod to some concerning behaviors by certain employees. No names were dropped, but the timing was far too coincidental. I know I should have been angry, maybe even fought back by sharing my side of the story, but instead, I found myself curious about just how far Allison would go with this. It only got stranger. Yesterday, I stopped by our local coffee shop, the one spot I thought was safe since Allison despised their coffee. But I was dead wrong. The usually friendly barista shot me a look, as if I were something clinging to her shoe. Later, I learned that Allison had become a regular there, passionately recounting her survival story to anyone willing to listen. The plot thickened when, while picking up some clothes from storage, I bumped into Juliana, supposedly Allison's best friend. She looked jittery, darting her eyes around like she was scared of being seen talking to me. In a hushed tone, she warned, "You need to be careful. Jay isn't just her boss, he's like her husband. She's deeply connected, and Allison's been telling everyone you're unstable and dangerous." I pressed, "Why are you telling me this?" Juliana's gaze shifted nervously as she admitted this wasn't the first time. Apparently, there'd been another guy at work, someone Allison and Jay treated the same way. He eventually packed up and left town. That conversation turned everything upside down for me. I spent the entire night combing through legal records and scouring social media, anything to piece together the truth. It turned out that the previous guy, someone named Mark or something similar, had indeed existed, and his social media presence vanished right around the time Allison started at the company. The next morning, I got a call from our landlord. Allison had tried to yank my name off the lease, claiming I'd abandoned the property. When that didn't work, she told him I'd been threatening her. The landlord called to warn me. He even mentioned that his sister had experienced something similar years ago. And then came the real kicker. Amidst all this chaos, I received an Instagram message request from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture was of an elegant woman in her 40s, decked out in expensive jewelry. Her message was brief. "I believe we need to talk about my husband and your girlfriend. Coffee tomorrow." It was signed, Mrs. J. I was set to meet her in an hour, and something told me that Allison's carefully crafted, real man narrative was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The bizarre part? Watching Allison weave this elaborate web of lies and seeing our so-called friends pick sides solely based on her word was oddly liberating. Every nasty post, every forced tear, every manipulated story just confirmed what I already suspected. I wasn't losing anything worth keeping. Update 2, sorry for the delay. These past 2 weeks have been an absolute whirlwind. That coffee meeting with Mrs. J turned out to be a total game changer. It turns out she'd been gathering evidence for months, not just about Allison and her husband, but about an entire pattern of misconduct at the company. Remember Juliana's warning about the guy who left town? He wasn't an isolated case. Mrs. J had documented at least 3 similar incidents over the past 5 years, young employees getting entangled with her husband and then being pushed out when someone threatened to expose them. But this time, Mrs. J was done staying quiet. She had texts, emails, expense reports, even security footage from the company parking garage. And she wanted one final act of public exposure. That's where the annual company party came in. I hadn't planned on going, why would I? But Mrs. J had other ideas. She'd once told me that the best revenge is simply letting people reveal their true colors. The party was hosted at a fancy downtown hotel. I arrived late, dressed sharper than I ever had for these events. The looks I got were priceless. Allison nearly dropped her drink, and Jay's face went from red to white so fast I half expected him to pass out. Then, something amazing happened. I didn't even have to make a move. Chloe, clearly tipsy, sidled up to me and slurred, "You've got some nerve showing up here." Loud enough for nearby groups to catch every word, especially after everything Allison put you through. I just smiled and said, "Everything I put her through." "Really? Tell me more," she prodded. That's when Gemma stepped in. Yes, the same coworker who had texted me earlier. She'd been quietly collecting her own evidence. Screenshots of Allison bragging about her conquests in company chat groups, recordings of her plotting how to spin the narrative with Jay. Gemma then announced, "I think we'd all like to hear the real story." The next hour was like watching dominoes topple. Mrs. J timed her entrance perfectly, tablet in hand, and suddenly the projector started playing a slideshow of incriminating messages and photos, plus clips of Allison's increasingly desperate attempts to control her own narrative. But the real spectacle came from Jacob. You know how they say, brothers before. Well, in this case, Jacob had been filming everything on his phone, planning to show it to Jay later as proof of his loyalty, or something. Instead, he captured Allison's complete meltdown. "You think you're so clever," she screamed at him. "You and that bitter old woman are trying to ruin everything I've built. Jay loves me, we're going to have a life together." And then Mrs. J dropped the cherry on top, divorce papers, already filed. It turned out that Jay had been promising Allison the same future he had dangled before those other employees. Same script, different actress. And through all of this, the best part was realizing that I wasn't losing anything worthwhile at all. She turned on her so-called friends, and threw a violent tantrum the moment she finally stood up for herself. Every post of hers racked up hundreds of sympathetic comments, even from people I once considered friends. The centerpiece was a tearful video, a crown jewel moment, in which she alleged that I had financially exploited her by forcing a strict 50-50 split on all our bills while I selfishly clutched my cash. Rich, considering she earned more than I did and had insisted on that very arrangement herself. Then came a text from Gemma, a coworker I'd known for years. "Hey, you might want to check your email. Something's going around the office about you." Sure enough, a company-wide email was sent out about creating a safe workplace, featuring a thinly veiled reference to recent concerning behaviors from certain employees. No names were mentioned, but the timing was anything but subtle. I probably should have been angry, maybe even fought back by posting my side of the story, but instead, I found myself curiously wondering just how far she would take this. It got even stranger. Yesterday, I swung by our local coffee shop, the one spot I assumed was safe since Allison despised their coffee. I was wrong. The barista, usually so friendly, shot me a look as if I were something stuck to her shoe. Later, I discovered that Allison had become a regular there, sharing her survival story with anyone who'd listen. Then, things took an unexpected turn. While picking up some clothes from storage, I ran into Juliana, Allison's supposed best friend. She looked visibly nervous, glancing around as if afraid of being seen talking to me. "You need to be careful," she whispered. "Jay isn't just her boss, he's practically like a husband. She's deeply connected with him, and Allison's been telling everyone you're unstable and dangerous." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Juliana's eyes darted around again. "Because this isn't the first time. There was another guy at work, Allison, and Jay did the same thing to him. He ended up leaving town. That conversation changed everything. I spent the entire night combing through legal records, social media, anything I could dig up. It turned out that the previous guy, someone named Mark or something similar, had indeed existed, his online presence disappearing completely around the time Allison started at the company. This morning I got a call from our landlord. Apparently, Allison had tried to remove my name from the lease by claiming I'd abandoned the property. When that plan didn't work, she told him I'd been threatening her. He called to warn me, mentioning that his sister had gone through something similar years ago. But here's the real kicker. In the midst of all this, I received an Instagram message request from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture was of an elegant woman in her 40s, adorned in expensive jewelry. Her message was simple. I believe we need to talk about my husband and your girlfriend. Coffee tomorrow. It was signed, Mrs. J. I'm meeting her in an hour, and something tells me that Allison's real man narrative is about to get a whole lot more complicated. The ironic part is that watching Allison weave this intricate web of lies, and seeing our so-called friends choose sides based solely on her word, was oddly liberating. Every spiteful post, every feigned tear, every manipulated story only confirmed what I already suspected. I wasn't losing anything truly worth keeping.